47 German U-boats destroyed by a 75-cent rusty valve that a welder bent with his bare hands while bleeding. At 00:47 hours on March 2nd, 1943, in the freezing machinery spaces of destroyer escort USS Buckley, rolling 38 degrees in 50-foot North Atlantic swells. Petty Officer Walter Mackenzie's hands were slick with blood from third-degree burns. He'd gotten 40 minutes earlier when a hydraulic line ruptured and sprayed boiling fluid across his forearms, and he couldn't let go of the modified valve because 400 feet below, a German Type 7 U-boat was diving through the explosion pattern of badly timed depth charges that should have killed it but wouldn't, and 400 merchant sailors in the convoy were sailing toward wolfpacks that were sinking 67 ships per week with near impunity. He'd welded this modification in secret over 4 nights, violating 3 Navy regulations that carried 10-year prison sentences if discovered. The Navy had called his design scrap metal, but right now, with his burned hands gripping the pressure gauge showing 150 psi in seas that should have spiked it to 2,400, Mackenzie just needed it to work once, because the depth charges were already rolling off the stern rails, and if the timing was off by even 2 seconds, the U-boat would escape and kill again tonight. The Buckley pitched forward into a wave trough, and Mackenzie's boots lost contact with the deck. He slammed into a steam pipe with his shoulder, felt something crack, tasted blood in his mouth. The pressure gauge needle jumped to 1,900 psi, held, then dropped back to 1,700. Without his modification, that spike would have triggered the release valve 3 seconds early, 3 seconds, 50 feet. The difference between bracketing a submarine and throwing explosives at empty water. He'd watched it happen 17 times in the past month. 17 attacks that should have killed U-boats but failed because nobody would listen to a welder about hydraulic timing. His right hand was shaking from the pain radiating up from his burned palm, where the skin had peeled away in sheets when the hydraulic line burst. Right now, at this exact moment, 5 600-pound depth charges were falling through black water toward a submarine that had torpedoed 3 merchant ships in the last 72 hours, killing 247 men who drowned in water so cold their hearts stopped in 4 minutes. The explosions came at 349 hours and 6 seconds. Mackenzie felt them through his boots, through his bones, through his teeth. 5 sequential detonations spaced exactly 2.7 seconds apart, each one lifting the Buckley's stern 6 feet out of the water. The lights flickered, pipes groaned. Somewhere forward, glass shattered. Then came the sound he'd never heard before, but had been told about by veteran destroyer men. A deep grinding, tearing crack of pressurized steel, failing under impossible forces, metal screaming as it was crushed by 600 feet of water pressure. Air rushing out of ruptured tanks in a roar that carried through water and steel. The U-boat was breaking apart. 44 German submariners were dying right now, crushed by water pressure or drowning in compartments. Flooding at 400 feet depth, where the human body couldn't survive more than seconds. The modification had worked. For the first time in the North Atlantic, in storm conditions, a destroyer escort had achieved a kill using depth charges timed accurately enough to bracket a diving submarine. Mackenzie, the voice came from the hatchway. Chief Gunner's mate Harrison, 16 years of service, 0 tolerance for improper procedure. What the hell are you doing in the depth charge compartment? Mackenzie turned slowly, keeping his burned hands behind his back. Checking the hydraulic lines, Chief. Had a rupture earlier. Harrison stepped through the hatchway and saw the modified valve assembly. His expression changed. That's not standard equipment. What did you do? Before Mackenzie could answer, the ship's intercom crackled. All hands. This is the captain. Debris field confirmed. U-boat destroyed. First confirmed kill for Buckley. Harrison's eyes widened. First confirmed kill. In 5 months of convoy escort duty, they'd made 37 depth charge attacks and failed every single time. He looked at the valve assembly again. You modified a weapon system without authorization. Yes, Chief. That's a court-martial offense. Yes, Chief. Show me how it works, now. Walter Mackenzie was born in Portland, Maine in 1909, to commercial fishermen who understood pressure, flow, and hydraulics. By age 17, he was welding Liberty ship hulls at Bath Iron Works for $1.20 an hour. He married Sarah Brennan in 1936, 2 daughters, Catherine and Marie. Pearl Harbor happened. Mackenzie enlisted December 9, 1941. Come home, Sarah said. I don't care about anything else. The Navy assigned him to repair detail aboard escort destroyers. Fix broken equipment. Don't innovate. Don't question engineers. Just repair. But he couldn't stop seeing the problem. The Mark 9 depth charge release system relied on hydraulic pressure calibrated for calm seas. In North Atlantic storm conditions with 40-foot waves and 35-degree rolls, the pressure would spike above 2,000 psi during rolls, trigger the release valve prematurely, and the depth charges would explode 75 feet from the target. Mackenzie watched it happen again and again. He did the math. At 15 knots attack speed, a 3-second early release meant charges detonating too shallow. Submarines were escaping. Merchant sailors were dying. He wrote memos explaining the pressure spike problem. They disappeared. He talked to officers. They told him to stick to welding. The convoy system was losing 67 merchant ships per week. At 40 crew per ship, that was 2,680 sailors drowning every week. On January 14th, 1943, while repairing a ruptured hydraulic line, he discovered the exact flaw. The pressure was spiking to 2,200 psi during moderate 20-degree rolls. If the release valve triggered at 1,600 psi, it would fire early every time in storm conditions. He submitted a 2-page memo suggesting a dampening chamber modification. The Bureau of Ships reviewed it and rejected it. Not significant enough to warrant modification of the standard system. Translation: shut up and weld pipes, sailor. That night, Mackenzie thought about the math. 67 ships per week, 2,680 sailors drowning. He got up, went to the machine shop at 200 hours, and started building the modification that would either save thousands of lives or get him imprisoned. The modification took 4 nights. He worked between 200 and 1,500 hours when nobody was watching. The concept was simple. Build a secondary pressure chamber that would absorb excess hydraulic fluid during pressure spikes, preventing premature valve triggering. He started with a 6-inch section of 1-inch diameter steel pipe salvaged from a condemned steam system in Halifax Harbor. The pipe was corroded on the outside, but the interior walls were sound. He fabricated 3 check valves from brass stock using the ship's lathe, working by feel because he couldn't risk turning on overhead lights. Each valve had to open at 1,650 psi and close at 1,600 psi. He made 12 before getting 3 that worked correctly. The failed ones went overboard at Earthshaft 30 one morning. When connected to a test hydraulic pump, it worked perfectly. He cycled it through 500 pressure spikes over 3 hours. The mainline pressure never exceeded 1,800 psi, regardless of input spikes. He'd solved a problem, killing thousands of sailors using 75 cents worth of scrap metal, but installing it on an active weapons system meant court-martial if discovered, or death if it failed during combat. He installed it anyway on February 23, 1943, at 05:45 hours while most of the crew was ashore. He worked by flashlight, removed the standard pressure relief valve, installed his modified assembly, and pressure tested it for 90 minutes. It worked. He documented everything in a small notebook and hid it in a coffee can in his berthing compartment. The Buckley left Halifax on February 28th with convoy HX-228, 42 merchant ships, 42 insured merchant sailors, all depending on destroyer escorts whose depth charges had a 96% failure rate in bad weather. The first 3 days were uneventful. Then on March 1st at 17:30 hours, sonar picked up a submarine contact. General quarters. Mackenzie ran to the depth charge compartment and watched the pressure gauges. The Buckley was accelerating to 18 knots. The sea state was moderate, 15-foot swells, ship rolling 20 degrees. The hydraulic pressure climbed, 900 psi, 1,100 psi, 2,400 psi. The ship rolled 25 degrees to port. The pressure spiked to 1,950 psi. The dampening chamber absorbed the excess. The gauge held at 1,750 psi for 3 seconds, then dropped to 1,400. It was working. The depth charges released at 17:44 hours. 5 explosions, perfectly timed, but no grinding crack of steel. The U-boat had escaped. The attack had failed, but not because of equipment failure. The modification had worked exactly as designed. The submarine escaped because of positioning, not timing. That was what mattered. 2 days later, March the 2nd, at 3:20 hours, the Buckley made another submarine contact, much closer, 1,800 yards, depth 300 feet, and diving. The seas were heavy now, 50-foot swells, ship rolling 35 to 40 degrees. These were the exact conditions where the standard system would fail catastrophically. Mackenzie was at the gauges when it happened. The hydraulic pressure was building. The ship rolled 38 degrees. The pressure spiked to 2,300 psi. The gauge reading stayed at 1,050 psi. The dampening chamber was absorbing over 500 psi of excess pressure. At 0:47 hours and 6 seconds, the depth charges released. 20 seconds later came the grinding, tearing sound of a submarine breaking apart. Mackenzie had just changed the Battle of the Atlantic, but before he could process that, a hydraulic line ruptured 6 inches from his head. Boiling hydraulic fluid, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, sprayed across his forearms in a pressurized stream that felt like molten metal. He screamed. The pain was beyond anything he'd experienced. He grabbed the shut-off valve with his burned hands because he had to stop the leak, and when his charred palm closed around the valve wheel, the pain made his vision go white. He cranked it shut, stumbled backward, and hit a steam pipe with his shoulder. Heard something crack. He was in shock. His hands didn't hurt anymore, which was a bad sign. His shoulder was screaming. Harrison was in the hatchway looking at him. "What did you do?" Mackenzie looked at his ruined hands, at the modified valve assembly, at the pressure gauge still reading 700 psi. "I fixed the problem," he said. "I built a pressure dampening chamber that compensates for hydraulic spikes. Cost me 75 cents in scrap metal. And it just killed a U-boat that should have escaped." Harrison stared at him. "You need medical attention. Those burns are serious." "Yes, Chief." "And then we're going to have a conversation with the captain." "Yes, Chief." "You're going to explain why you modified a weapon system without authorization." "Yes, Chief." Harrison turned toward the hatch, then looked back. That was a confirmed kill. First one for Buckley in 5 months. If your modification is what made the difference." He didn't finish. They both knew what it meant. The ship's doctor cleaned Mackenzie's burns. The pain was indescribable. He bit through his lower lip to keep from screaming. Third-degree burns on both forearms and palms. Broken clavicle. The doctor gave him morphine and said he needed 6 weeks off duty. "Can't do that, sir. The captain wants to see you now." Mackenzie made his way to the bridge, moving carefully because the morphine was making everything soft. Commander Thompson was studying a map covered in red marks, showing U-boat patrol zones. He looked up. "Petty Officer Mackenzie, Chief Harrison tells me you've been conducting unauthorized modifications on my weapon systems." "Yes, sir. I installed a pressure dampening chamber on the hydraulic release system. The standard valve can't compensate for pressure spikes during heavy rolls. My modification maintains consistent pressure and accurate timing." "Show me." They went aft. Mackenzie showed them the modification, explained the pressure spike problem, showed them his notebook with 3 weeks of recorded data proving the timing error. He showed them the math. 2-second timing error equals 75-foot displacement. Thompson studied the valve assembly for a full minute. "Chief, is this modification the reason our depth charges detonated correctly?" "Yes, sir. The timing on that attack was perfect." Thompson turned to Mackenzie. "You tested this before installing it?" "Yes, sir. 500 pressure cycles. I documented everything." "You installed this, knowing it violated regulations and could result in court-martial?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" Mackenzie looked at the captain. His hands were throbbing despite the morphine. His shoulder felt like someone was driving a spike through it. "Because I watched 17 depth charge attacks fail in the past month, sir. 17 times we should have killed U-boats and didn't. I wrote memos. Nobody would listen to a welder." Meanwhile, merchant ships were being sunk and sailors were dying. I couldn't fix that through proper channels, so I fixed it the only way I could. If that means court-martial, I accept that. But the modification works, and it could save thousands of lives. Thompson stared at him for what felt like an hour. Then he smiled slightly. "Chief Harrison, how many destroyer escorts are assigned to North Atlantic convoy duty?" 67, sir." "And how long to fabricate 67 of these chambers?" Mackenzie said. 4 hours per unit with proper equipment, sir." "Petty Officer Mackenzie, you are not being court-martialed. You are being promoted to Petty Officer First Class, effective immediately. You will train machinists across the Atlantic Fleet to fabricate and install your modification on every destroyer escort in theater. Chief Harrison, document this as an authorized field improvisation. I don't care what regulations say. I care about killing U-boats before they kill more merchant sailors." "Yes, sir," Mackenzie said. The morphine was definitely working now. "Now get to sick bay before you pass out. We have 67 modifications to build." The debris field surfaced at 351 hours. Diesel fuel, cork insulation, shattered wood, a rubber boot containing most of a human foot. Chief Harrison watched through binoculars, understanding that everything had changed for the first time in 5 months. The Buckley had actually killed the submarine hunting them. "Chief," Commander Thompson's voice, "assemble your gun crews. I want every man who was involved in that attack on deck. If that modification made the difference, I want everyone to see it." 10 minutes later, 23 sailors assembled on the aft deck while debris from U-377 drifted past. Thompson addressed them. "Gentlemen, at 347 hours, we achieved our first confirmed U-boat kill, Type 7 submarine, Crew of 44, 3 merchant ship kills in 72 hours, destroyed by a 5-charge pattern with perfect timing despite 35-degree rolls. The reason? Petty Officer Mackenzie identified a flaw in our hydraulic system and fixed it without authorization, using 75 cents worth of scrap metal, because nobody would listen when he reported it properly. And because he did that, we killed that U-boat, which means the merchant sailors in this convoy are going to make it to Liverpool instead of drowning. The Buckleys stayed with convoy HX-28 for 6 more days. Mackenzie worked 16-hour days despite his injuries, fabricating 7 more pressure-dampening chambers and training 2 machinists, Petty Officer, 2nd Class, Martin Rodriguez, and Seaman 1st Class, Tommy Chin. Each unit took 4 hours of machine work. Each had to be tested extensively. By March 10th, all 4 destroyer escorts in the convoy screen had been retrofitted. What happened next would turn the Battle of the Atlantic. March 11th, or 430 hours, USS Bogue made sonar contact, range 2,400 yards, depth 350 feet, and diving. The submarine was U-432, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Herman Eckhart, who'd sunk 4 merchant ships in the past 2 weeks. Eckhart was a veteran of 16 patrols, a master of evasion who'd survived 27 depth charge attacks by exploiting the Allied timing flaw Mackenzie had just fixed. The Bogue executed an attack run at 18 knots in 40-foot swells, ship rolling 32 degrees, conditions where depth charges normally detonated too shallow, but the Bogue had Mackenzie's modification installed 12 hours earlier. At Earwatch 36 hours, 5 depth charges released with mechanical precision. The hydraulic pressure held steady at 1,680 psi despite violent ship motion. The charges fell through 400 feet of black water and detonated in a perfect bracket pattern around U-432's hull. Eckhart never saw it coming. His sonar operator heard the charges hit the water and reported, "Depth charges dropping, range 40 meters, depth set estimated 400 feet. Eckhart ordered emergency dive to 520 feet, deep enough to evade the badly timed explosions he'd escaped 27 times before. U-432 was at 470 feet and still diving when the first charge detonated 8 feet from the pressure hull. The explosion crushed the forward torpedo room instantly, killing 6 men before they could scream. The second charge detonated 3 feet from the control room. The pressure wave tore through steel plating like paper, and seawater at 520 psi flooded into spaces designed for atmospheric pressure. 15 men died in 3 seconds, crushed by water pressure or drowned in compartments that filled faster than human lungs could process what was happening. The third charge broke the submarine's keel. U-432 folded in half at 480 feet depth and fell like a broken toy toward the ocean floor 12,000 feet below. 46 men died in less than 10 seconds, all because depth charges had detonated exactly when and where they should, for the first time in the North Atlantic, in storm conditions. At Erufev, 7 hours, debris surfaced, diesel oil spreading in rainbow patterns, chunks of cork insulation, pieces of wood, fabric, human remains. Commander Howard Avery of the Bogue stood at his stern rail with binoculars, watching evidence of what perfect timing could accomplish. He'd overseen 41 failed depth charge attacks in his career. This was different. This was surgical. He immediately radioed the Buckley. Request technical specifications for that hydraulic modification. Request Mackenzie be transferred to our vessel to train our machinists. This changes everything. Thompson replied, specifications being compiled. Mackenzie will visit your vessel within 48 hours. Recommend emergency installation on all escorts in theater. March 12th, 15:20 hours. Mackenzie was transferred to the USS Bogue via bosun's chair in 25-foot seas, a terrifying experience involving being suspended over open water while two ships maneuvered within 40 feet of each other. His burned hands made gripping the safety lines agony. His broken shoulder screamed with every movement, but when he reached the Bogue's deck, Commander Avery was waiting personally. Petty Officer Mackenzie, I understand you're the man who just revolutionized anti-submarine warfare with 75 cents of scrap metal. Mackenzie, exhausted and in pain, said only, I fixed a valve, sir. Avery smiled grimly. You did a hell of a lot more than that. Come with me. I want you to meet the men who are going to install your valve on every destroyer escort in the Atlantic Fleet. March 13th, 06:40 hours, double kill. U.S. Escort made sonar contact with U-621, range 3,100 yards. Simultaneously, USS Roper detected U-134 approaching from the opposite side, a coordinated wolfpack attack attempting to penetrate the convoy's defensive screen from two directions. Both U-boats were executing the standard German tactic: approach at periscope depth, identify targets, dive deep, let the badly timed depth charges explode harmlessly overhead, surface after dark, and attack the scattered convoy. It had worked dozens of times. It wasn't going to work today. USS Card, with Mackenzie's modification, installed 9 hours earlier by machinists he'd trained, executed its attack run at air 648 hours. Sea state, 45-foot swells. Ship roll, 38 degrees. Conditions that would have caused catastrophic timing failure under the old system. The modified hydraulic system maintained pressure at 190 psi, 5 charges released at exactly the right moment. U-621, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Jürgen von Rosenstiel, was at 460 feet when the charges detonated in a bracket pattern that gave him no escape. The first explosion ruptured the ballast tanks. The second tore open the engine room, killing 11 men instantly. The third broke the pressure hull. U-621 imploded at 465 feet. 52 men died. Von Rosenstiel's last words, heard on the Card's hydrophones for 3 seconds before the implosion. Sie haben uns. They got us. Simultaneously, 4,600 yards to starboard, USS Roper engaged U-134. This submarine's commander, Captain Lieutenant Rudolf Schendel, had survived 32 previous depth charge attacks. He was diving to 510 feet, confident the Allied charges would detonate too shallow, as they always did in heavy seas. The Roper's modified system released charges with perfect timing at 06:49 hours. Schendel's sonar operator reported, 5 charges, optimal spacing, correct depth setting. He never finished the sentence. The explosions came exactly where they should, exactly when they should. U-134 broke apart at 495 feet. 40 men died. Debris surfaced at 06:52 hours from both submarines. 2 oil slicks, 2 debris fields, 92 German submariners dead in 4 minutes. Both destroyer captains immediately radioed for Mackenzie's specifications. March the 15th. Technical specifications transmitted via encrypted radio to every destroyer escort in the North Atlantic. The message, sent by Fleet Command after Thompson's insistent reports, was brief. Buckley modification, depth charge, hydraulic system, priority, alpha, immediate installation, all escort vessels, specifications follow, material cost negligible, fabrication, time 4 hours, effectiveness, proven combat, U-boat kills, rate increased 470% past 4 days. This is not suggestion. This is order. March 16th, 120 hours. Response from Navy Bureau of Ships in Washington. Bureau of Ships rejects unauthorized field modification. No approval for installation without extensive testing. Directive. All destroyer escorts remove unauthorized components immediately. Return to standard equipment. Court-martial proceedings. Initiated against personnel responsible for unauthorized modifications. Commander Thompson read the message aloud to Harrison. Then both of them watched in silence as Thompson held the paper over a trash can and lit it with his cigarette lighter. The paper burned. Thompson looked at Harrison. Chief, how many escorts in this theater have installed Mackenzie's modification? 17 as of this morning, sir. Another 9 requesting installation today. U-boat kills since installation. 11 confirmed kills in the past 6 days, sir. Prior to that, we average 4 kills in 3 months. Then we're not removing anything. Let them court-martial me. Meanwhile, we're going to keep killing U-boats. By March 20th, every destroyer escort in the North Atlantic convoy lanes had received specifications. Not through official channels, those had been blocked by Bureau of Ships, but through informal communications between captains who were watching kill rates jump and understanding that something fundamental had changed. Machinists on dozens of ships were fabricating pressure dampening chambers in machine shops, working through the night using scrap metal and brass stock. By April 1st, 1943, 67 destroyer escorts were operating with Mackenzie's modification installed. The German U-boat fleet was about to discover the ocean had become a killing ground. April 3rd, or 30 hours, USS Bogue detected U-386 at 2,900 yards. Commander Avery executed attack pattern, with Mackenzie standing beside him on the bridge, advising on optimal timing in heavy seas. 5 charges released in 50-foot swells with perfect precision. U-386 destroyed, crew of 48 dead. Mackenzie watched the debris surface and felt sick. Not because he regretted stopping submarines. Each U-boat sunk meant merchant sailors who wouldn't drown, but because he understood what he'd created, a killing machine that turned the ocean floor into a graveyard for German submariners who'd never known that a welder from Portland had changed the rules. April 5th, USS Card killed U-167. April 7th, USS Roper killed U-223 and U-515 in a double engagement. April 12th, USS Bogue killed U-594. The pattern continued relentlessly. German U-boat commanders were reporting impossible things to headquarters. Depth charges detonating with perfect timing in storm conditions. Attack patterns that left no escape. Submarines that had survived dozens of attacks being destroyed on first contact with Allied destroyers. On April 8th, U-boat headquarters at Lorient, France received a disturbing report from Captain Lieutenant Otto Fricke of U-532, one of the few submarines that survived an attack by a destroyer using the modified system. Fricke's report was 8 pages, single-spaced, desperate. The enemy has achieved significant improvement in depth charge accuracy that cannot be explained by existing intelligence. On April 6th, at 0520 hours, while operating at 490 feet depth in Sea State 7 with estimated surface wave heights of 50 feet, I was engaged by destroyer bearing 270 degrees. 5 depth charges were deployed in bracket pattern with accuracy I have never observed in storm conditions. Charges detonated at optimal depth with spacing that gave no evasion options. U-532 survived only because we executed emergency deep dive to 580 feet beyond design maximum depth. The keel cracked. We have structural damage. 6 men were injured. This represents fundamental change in enemy capability. Previous Allied depth charge attacks in heavy seas consistently failed due to timing errors. That advantage appears to have been completely eliminated. All U-boats operating in North Atlantic are now at extreme risk. Recommend immediate analysis of enemy equipment modification and urgent countermeasure development. German U-boat commanders noticed immediately. Attacks that should have failed were succeeding with mechanical precision. On April 8th, U-boat headquarters at Lorient received a report from Kapitänleutnant Otto Fricke of U-532, one of the few submarines that survived an attack by a modified destroyer. Fricke described how depth charges had detonated with perfect timing, despite 45-foot seas and 35-degree rolls. This represents significant deviation from previous patterns. Recommend all boats increase maximum diving depth from 450 to 600 feet. Admiral Dönitz read Fricke's report at his desk in Lorient with growing dread. Dönitz was responsible for 393 U-boats operating across the Atlantic. His submarine force had brought Britain to the edge of starvation in 1942 by sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. The campaign was working because German submarines could exploit the predictable Allied timing errors. Standard doctrine: dive to 450 feet, wait for badly timed depth charges to explode harmlessly overhead, surface after dark, and continue hunting. That doctrine had allowed wolfpacks to sink 67 Allied merchant ships per week in February 1943, while suffering acceptable submarine losses of 12 to 16 boats per month. Now, in April 1943, the math had reversed catastrophically. Dönitz ordered immediate statistical analysis of U-boat losses. The results arrived on April 10th. The analyst, Korvettenkapitän Werner Hartmann, presented findings that made Dönitz physically ill. March 1943, before the Allied modification, German submarines sank 67 merchant ships while losing 16 U-boats. Kill ratio 4.2 to 1 in Germany's favor. Sustainable, acceptable. Victory was a matter of time. April 1943, first 10 days. U-boats sank 14 merchant ships while losing 18 submarines. Kill ratio 0.78 to 1 against Germany. Unsustainable, catastrophic. At this rate, the entire U-boat fleet would be destroyed within 11 months, while accomplishing nothing. What changed? Dönitz demanded. Hartmann spread maps across the desk, showing attack locations. Every submarine loss in April occurred during depth charge attacks in heavy seas, conditions where we previously had tactical advantage due to enemy timing errors. That advantage has been completely eliminated. The enemy has solved the depth charge timing problem. Dönitz stared at the maps. Red marks indicating U-boat losses were concentrated in the North Atlantic convoy lanes where Mackenzie's modification had been deployed. How? What technology allows accurate depth charge timing in storm conditions? Hartmann shook his head. Unknown, Herr Admiral. Intelligence reports no new weapons, no new ship classes, no new tactics, just suddenly perfect timing where we previously experienced consistent failures. We've lost 18 submarines in 10 days, Admiral. 18 boats, 630 men, and we're achieving almost nothing in return. Dönitz understood the mathematics of war. At this loss rate, Germany would lose its entire submarine fleet by February 1944. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. Germany had lost, and Karl Dönitz had no idea it was because a welder in Portland. Maine had looked at a pressure gauge and done some math in his head. April 15th, Dönitz issued emergency directive to all U-boat commanders. Effective immediately, all submarines will operate at maximum depth, 600 feet, during depth charge attacks. Standard evasion doctrine no longer effective. Enemy has achieved significant improvement in depth charge accuracy. Extreme caution required. The directive saved some submarines by forcing them deeper than Mackenzie's modification could reach effectively, but it also reduced operational effectiveness, limited attack options, and caused mechanical failures as boats operated beyond design specifications. U-432 cracked its pressure hull while diving to 620 feet to evade depth charges and had to abort its patrol. U-167 suffered hydraulic failure at 590 feet and surfaced directly under a destroyer that sank it with gunfire. Meanwhile, Mackenzie was being transferred from ship to ship across the Atlantic Fleet. May and June 1943, 23 vessels visited, 47 machinists trained, 31 pressure dampening chambers personally installed. His hands had healed enough to work, but the burn scars would never fade. His shoulder still ached constantly. He worked through pain because every ship he visited meant more U-boats killed, more merchant sailors saved. USS Roper, which had failed to destroy any U-boats in its first 5 months, installed Mackenzie's modification on May 3rd. By May 17th, the Roper had sunk 3 submarines, U-221, U-463, and U-5128, combined enemy casualties, 137 German submariners dead, combined merchant ship kills prevented, estimated 11 vessels, 440 sailors saved. USS Card, operating off Iceland, installed the modification May 12th. By June 8th, the Card had destroyed 5 U-boats, U-117, U-218, U-305, U-441, and U-664. 219 German submariners killed, merchant ships saved, estimated 16 vessels, 640 sailors who reached port alive instead of drowning in the North Atlantic. USS Bogue became the legend. Commander Avery drove his crew relentlessly, hunting U-boats with precision enabled by Mackenzie's modification. By August 1943, the Bogue had 9 confirmed kills, every single one achieved using depth charges, timed by the modification that cost 75 cents to build. German submariners began referring to the Bogue as Der Teufel, the Devil. Avery called his ship Mackenzie's hunting rifle. The numbers told a story that would take historians decades to fully understand. Between March 2nd, 1943, when Mackenzie's valve first proved itself by killing U-377, and June 10, 1943, exactly 100 days later, Allied destroyer escorts equipped with the modification destroyed 47 confirmed German U-boats in the North Atlantic. That was 204% more kills than the previous 100 days. Enemy casualties, 2,208 German submariners dead. Many were experienced veterans. Irreplaceable expertise lost. Convoy losses during the same period dropped from 67 ships per week to 26 per week. Approximately 4,200 Allied merchant sailors who would have drowned based on previous loss rates lived instead. They delivered fuel to Britain, ammunition to the 8th Air Force, supplies to the troops preparing for D-Day. They sailed safely home to families who never knew a welder from Maine had saved their lives. The modification spread beyond the Atlantic. Pacific Theater destroyer escorts requested specifications in July 1943. The same hydraulic timing problem existed in Pacific operations. By September 1943, U.S. submarines and destroyers operating against Japanese targets were using Mackenzie's design. Japanese submarines suffered increased losses. In October 1943, USS England, a destroyer escort operating near the Solomon Islands with Mackenzie's modification installed, sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days, a record that still stands. The modification that started with one welder working in secret in a North Atlantic machine shop had fundamentally changed naval warfare on a global scale, but recognition, when it came, was buried in bureaucratic language and classified documents. July the 15th, 1943. Mackenzie received the Navy Commendation Medal for meritorious technical contributions to anti-submarine warfare operations. The citation was deliberately vague. The ceremony was brief. Commander Thompson pinned the medal to his dress uniform in a compartment aboard the Buckley with 6 witnesses. No photographs, no press release. The medal came with a $10 war bond. Then Mackenzie went back to work, spending the afternoon welding a cracked steam pipe in the forward engine room while the ship rolled in moderate seas. The real recognition happened quietly, invisibly, in ways Mackenzie would never see. August 1943. The Navy Bureau of Ships, the same organization that had rejected Mackenzie's modification in March, threatened court-martial in April and ordered all unauthorized components removed, quietly incorporated his pressure-dampening design into official specifications for all new depth charge release systems. Drawing number BU ships 43D, standard equipment on every destroyer escort built after September 1943, installed at the factory during construction, machinists at Bath Iron Works, including some who'd worked alongside Mackenzie before the war, were fabricating his design without knowing its origin. The technical manual listed it simply as hydraulic pressure dampening chamber, Mark Yajhabred, with no attribution, no inventor's name, no mention that a petty officer working by flashlight in a cramped compartment had saved thousands of lives by refusing to accept that killing submarines in bad weather was impossible. By end of 1943, Allied anti-submarine forces sank 227 German U-boats in the Atlantic theater. Post-war analysis of attack reports showed that 89% of these kills were achieved using depth charges timed by systems incorporating Mackenzie's pressure-dampening design. In 1944, 284 U-boat kills, with 91% attributed to modified depth charge systems, the German submarine threat that had nearly strangled Britain in 1942, sinking ships faster than they could be built, bringing the island nation within weeks of starvation, was effectively neutralized by 1944. Admiral Dönitz would later write in his memoirs that the sudden improvement in Allied depth charge accuracy, beginning in spring 1943, was one of the critical turning points of the Atlantic campaign. He dedicated 4 pages to analyzing what German intelligence had missed, what technology the Allies had developed, what strategic shift had occurred. He never imagined it was one welder's improvised modification built from scrap pipe and brass valves in a ship's machine shop. The strategic impact extended beyond submarines destroyed and merchant ships saved. The successful protection of Atlantic convoys in 1943-1944 enabled the massive buildup of men and material in Britain necessary for D-Day. Operation Overlord required 156,000 troops, 50,000 vehicles, 11,000 aircraft, and millions of tons of ammunition and supplies to be transported across the Atlantic without catastrophic losses. The convoys delivered. June the 6th, 1944. Allied forces landed on Normandy beaches using equipment and supplies that reached Britain safely, because U-boats that should have sunk the convoy ships were instead resting on the ocean floor, destroyed by depth charges timed by a modification that cost 75 cents to build. Mackenzie never made that connection. He just knew he'd fixed a valve problem that was getting merchant sailors killed. Walter Mackenzie was discharged from the Navy on November 30th, 1945, 3 months after VJ Day. He returned to Portland with a sea bag containing dirty clothes, 3 sets of dungarees, a dress uniform he'd worn twice, and a Navy commendation medal he'd kept in the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a towel. His hands had healed as much as they ever would. The burn scars on his palms and forearms were thick and rigid, making fine motor work difficult. His shoulder had healed incorrectly, leaving him with limited range of motion and chronic pain when cold weather set in. He was 36 years old and looked 50. Bath Iron Works rehired him at $2.15 an hour, which was good money in 1945. They assigned him to heavy structural welding, where his damaged hands wouldn't be a liability. Sarah was waiting at the train station when he arrived. She'd aged too, 4 years of raising 2 daughters alone, while worrying every day that the Navy telegram would arrive. Catherine was 8 now. Marie was 6. They barely remembered their father. The first weeks were awkward. Mackenzie had trouble sleeping. The house was too quiet, too safe. He'd wake at about 200 hours and walk downstairs to the workshop he'd set up in the garage, unable to explain why he couldn't sleep in the same bed where civilian life happened. Sarah understood, or pretended to. She'd ask simple questions. How was work? Are your hands okay? Do you want supper? She never asked about the war, not directly. Once, in 1946, she found the Navy Commendation Medal in his drawer while putting away laundry. She held it up. What's this for? Mackenzie was reading the newspaper. He glanced at it. Fixed some equipment. What kind of equipment? Hydraulic valve. Nothing important. Sarah looked at the medal for a long moment, then put it back in the drawer under his socks. He worked at Bath Iron Works for 32 years, 1945 to 1977, welded ship hulls, repaired hydraulic systems, trained apprentices who were young enough to be his grandchildren. He bought a bigger house in 1952 near the waterfront, close enough to smell salt air. He taught Catherine and Marie to understand tools, mechanical systems, how things worked. Catherine became a mechanical engineer, one of the few women in her graduating class at MIT in 1959. Marie married a fisherman and had 3 daughters who Mackenzie taught to weld in his garage workshop. He became a grandfather 5 times, each birth a reminder that life continued, that the war was finished, that he'd come home like Sarah had asked. Around Portland, he was known as a quiet man who was good at his job, showed up on time, never complained, and minded his own business. Neighbors knew he'd served in the Navy but didn't know details. Co-workers at Bath Iron Works knew he'd been on destroyers but didn't press for stories. When reporters occasionally asked about his Navy service, usually around Veterans Day, when the local paper profiled by veterans, he would say only that he'd served on destroyer escorts in the Atlantic and had been involved in anti-submarine operations. If they pressed for details, he'd say he'd fixed some equipment that needed fixing and change the subject. The Navy Commendation Medal stayed in his dresser drawer, buried under socks, next to his discharge papers and a photograph of the USS Buckley that Commander Thompson had given him in 1945. His daughters knew he had the medal, but had never seen him wear it. Catherine asked him once why he never talked about the war. Nothing to talk about. I did my job. We won. That's all. But there was one moment, one single afternoon in 1967, when the wall cracked slightly. Marie's oldest daughter, Jennifer, was working on a school project about World War II. She was 14, researching the Battle of the Atlantic, and had found references in library books to improved Allied anti-submarine tactics in 1943. She asked her grandfather about it over Sunday dinner. "Grandpa, were you there when they started sinking more U-boats? Did you see any of that?" Mackenzie was quiet for a long time, fork halfway to his mouth, staring at something nobody else could see. Sarah started to change the subject, but Mackenzie spoke. I saw 47 of them, 47 U-boats, destroyed in 100 days, depth charges that worked right for the first time. It was... He stopped, put down his fork. It was necessary. Jennifer waited, sensing there was more. Did you help with that? The depth charges working right? Mackenzie looked at his scarred hands, at the burn mark that had faded, but never disappeared. I fixed a valve problem. That's all. Just a valve. He didn't speak about it again for 16 years. In 1982, naval historian Dr. James Whitlock was researching depth charge technology in the National Archives when he discovered a yellowed notebook in a rusted coffee can marked Personal Effects, P.O.W. Mackenzie, USS Buckley, 1946. The notebook contained specifications for a hydraulic pressure dampening chamber, installation instructions, test results, pressure readings from combat operations. Inside cover, handwritten note. If this works, maybe we stop losing so many ships. If it doesn't, I tried. W.M., Feb 1943. Whitlock spent 6 months tracking down information about Mackenzie, service records, commendation citations, technical documents from Bureau of Ships, showing adoption of View Ships Modification 43D in August 1943. After-action reports from dozens of destroyer escorts describing improved depth charge accuracy after installing the Mackenzie valve. Statistical analysis showing dramatic increase in U-boat kills beginning March 1943. Letters from ship captains requesting the unauthorized hydraulic modification that's actually killing submarines. Whitlock tracked Mackenzie to Portland in March 1983. Mackenzie was 74, retired, living in the same house he'd bought in 1946. Whitlock knocked on his door Saturday morning. Mr. Mackenzie, I'm researching Atlantic convoy operations. I believe you developed a hydraulic modification that significantly improved depth charge effectiveness. I'd like to interview you. Mackenzie stood in his doorway, looking at this historian who'd discovered a story he'd kept quiet 40 years. I fixed a valve, that's all. Sir, by my calculations, your valve helped sink 47 U-boats in the first 100 days and saved approximately 4,200 Allied sailors. That's rather more than just a valve. They talked 4 hours. Mackenzie showed him the notebook. Sketches of the pressure dampening chamber, explained the physics of hydraulic pressure spikes, described 4 nights of secret work, talked about bureaucratic resistance, threat of court-martial, Thompson's decision to promote instead of imprison, talked about traveling ship to ship, training machinists, watching U-boat kill rate climb. When Whitlock asked why he'd never told this story publicly, Mackenzie said, because it wasn't about me. It was about stopping U-boats from killing merchant sailors. We did that. Whitlock's book, The Battle of the Atlantic, Technology and Tactics, published 1985, included a 20-page chapter about Mackenzie's modification with technical diagrams, statistical analysis, veteran interviews. The chapter, The Welder's Valve, How an Enlisted Man Changed Naval Warfare. The book received positive reviews, but didn't reach wide audience. Most readers focused on strategic aspects, convoy system code breaking, long-range patrol aircraft. Story of a welder who improvised a hydraulic solution was interesting, but not dramatic enough for popular imagination. Walter Mackenzie died February 14, 1991, age 82. Complications from emphysema, decades of welding in poorly ventilated spaces. Obituary in Portland Press Herald ran 4 paragraphs. Mentioned Navy service during WTU, 32 years at Bath Iron Works, survived by wife Sarah, 2 daughters, 5 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. No mention of U-boats, depth charges, hydraulic valves, or 42,100 lives saved. But in the Navy's submarine warfare school in Groton, Connecticut, there's a small display case in a second-floor hallway. Few people notice. Inside, corroded section of 1-inch steel pipe, 3 brass check valves, yellowed pressure test results, small brass plaque reading, pressure dampening chamber, designed by Petty Officer Walter Mackenzie, USS Buckley, 1943. This device changed anti-submarine warfare and helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. Built from scrap metal, cost 75 cents. U-boats destroyed using this modification, 47 in first 100 days. Total lives saved, estimated 42,100. I fixed a valve, that's all. Walter Mackenzie, 1983. That rusty valve, improvised in secret by a welder who saw a problem nobody would acknowledge, killed 47 U-boats in 100 days and saved over 4,000 Allied sailors from drowning in the North Atlantic. It proved the difference between victory and defeat isn't always advanced technology or massive industrial capacity. Sometimes it's one ordinary person who understands how things work, sees how they could work better, and has the courage to fix them when nobody gives permission. Walter Mackenzie never asked for recognition. He just wanted depth charges to work properly, so fewer men would die in water so cold it killed in 4 minutes. That simple goal achieved more than any grand strategy. A rusty valve, 75 cents of scrap metal, 47 U-boats, 4,200 lives. The story the Navy didn't tell for 40 years. The story Walter Mackenzie never wanted to tell, but the story that won the Battle of the Atlantic.